right, welcome to the Michigan EV Charging Roundtable Series 301. So I'm going to go ahead and get started and just keep an eye on our waiting room here. Thanks everyone for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us this afternoon. This is just a meeting, so please, adhere to our new Zoom guidelines as we exist in the Zoom world, and stay on mute when you're not talking, but I promise that we'll save plenty of time at the end for open discussion. So jot down your questions or put them in the chat so that you don't forget them. Promise to keep as much time for open discussion and asking your questions and hearing your feedback as possible. My name is Jane McCurry, and I'm the Executive Director of Clean Fuels Michigan. We are a nonprofit trade association that is dedicated to advancing clean fuels here in Michigan and beyond. Since we're a trade association, we are supported by our member companies. Many are represented on the call here today. So I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you for funding us and allowing us to do this work. Just to frame up the opportunity and why we're hosting these sessions, I think, as most of you know, the My Healthy Climate Plan, which was released earlier this year, sets a goal of preparing the infrastructure to support 2 million electric vehicles in Michigan by 2030. That's a lot of electric vehicles in just a few years. So there's a huge opportunity to make sure that we are putting that infrastructure in the ground really efficiently and effectively. And the great news is that we have a lot of funding to be doing that. Michigan's set to receive $110 million over the next 5 years in IIJA funding, and there's even more available through competitive processes through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Michigan's plan to spend that $110 million is in development now, and so it's a critical time to be forming our collective thoughts and learning as much as we can to inform that plan so that Michigan, again, spends that money really effectively to build out the infrastructure that we need for our residents and tourists. And this is really complicated. There are numerous stakeholders involved in every project. And so we wanted to create a forum for folks from across this industry, from government agencies to utilities to charging station providers to potential site hosts and other experts to come together and talk about what you're seeing in your corner of this complicated EV charging landscape. And so with that said, we have this roundtable series. This is the second session in the series, and the goal is to create a forum to tackle some of these complex topics and curate our collective recommendations. And of course, to highlight the leadership that Michigan stakeholders are taking in this industry. So like I said, this is session 2. Today, we are focusing on site planning. We are going to hear from Joey Bono with GreenLancer EV, and then his presentation will be followed by comments from Jason Westall with Mobility House and Brett Steudle from DTE Energy. And then, like I said, we'll have plenty of time for discussion. We may go into breakout sessions, so be thinking about your questions, your comments, your concerns, and we'll be able to get to those by the end of the hour today. So I am going to hand the floor over. Joey, while I pull your slides up, could you just frame us up and define site planning or site design? Like, give a super high level. What are we talking about here today?
Yeah, so EVC site planning is important for all segments, whether it be fleet or commercial, multi-unit dwellings, that sort of thing. It's a process that really helps you have a positive impact on adding EV charging to your site. It can be complex, but today we're going to try to just distill it down and make it as simple as possible. That way we can all use these learnings to build out this infrastructure more effectively.
Awesome, thank you.
So I want to thank Jane and Clean Fuels Michigan for number one, having this roundtable series and bringing me on to talk about EVC site design and planning. So we can jump into the next slide. So proper site design is key. Some of the factors that we're looking at are the location of the chargers, the electrical equipment, the charger footprint, the parking spot count, ADA accessibility, and utilizing 811 or utility staking to identify other existing utility lines that might affect your site install. Another key here is to identify all the stakeholders that are involved in your project. Depending on which segment you're in, you're going to have multiple AHJs, authorities having jurisdiction within that. And then, of course, we want to make it as easy to use for the EV drivers. So here, I've just got some graphics here about ADA accessibility. This is one of the biggest things that we have going on in the industry right now, is making sure that our sites are accessible for all peoples, all EV drivers. And so this graphic here is going to help you just kind of, get a frame on the way that you can design your site. And most of these parking lots are already pre-existing, or parking garages are pre-existing. So ways that you can integrate ADA accessibility design within your existing site. We will go to the next slide. And the biggest thing, we've got some utility folks on the call here, is the integration with the grid. So the first step there is to collect a very comprehensive site survey. And this is, you're identifying the existing electrical on your property, the primary voltage, relative to what charger type you're installing. The first step that we like to help our clients do is work with the preliminary design, and conduct a load study, and those load studies can be relative to your existing load and then the projected load that you're going to add on this. And the utility companies, especially those for the interconnection and the rebate applications, they really like to see load calculations and single line diagrams presented as a part of their application, so they can know what their upstream design needs to be. And then, as always, engage with the utility early and often, especially on DC sites. In a comprehensive site survey, that's kind of the key. The whole crux to this is, we're not just identifying the existing electrical supply, but we're also having to, see what's underground. We don't always know what's underground. We can use the utility staking, which is important. There is a service where you can do subsurface mapping if need be, but it's what we're looking for is what's beyond the eye. What's underground, what's going to affect our site design. And of course, we want you to work with an experienced EVC site design and engineering firm like GreenLancer EV, and we're going to help you start with a preliminary design, and that design is going to help all of the stakeholder input. And that design is just going to be the site layout. Here's where the equipment's going. Here's what's going to be affected. Here's our, the parking spots. Here's how we're going to have to adjust the parking spot count and accommodate for ADA accessibility. And that feasibility analysis that is early on in the site design process is so key. And that intersects with the sales process. So as the sales folks are out there selling these sites, it's important for them to keep all of these things in mind when they are engaging with their clients, before we get too deep into the design process, because we want to avoid the red lines of Project Doom. And the best way that we can do that is, again, just a really comprehensive site survey analysis, and to make sure that all stakeholders and AHJs are on board with what we're trying to accomplish here. And some ways that we can control costs and streamline some of this process is, it's a simple phrase. We want to qualify the site, we want to contain the cost, and we want to ensure a timely install. And again, with the early stage of project design, we really encourage you to find a good design engineering company that's going to help you guide you through the process. And that way, makes it less less troublesome. And then we're going to help you create those designs, and those designs you can send out to electrical contractors for estimates, for bids. And we really like this structure because it allows the end customer to have more control over the early stage project management. And for those folks that are working through the utility rebate applications, many times there's qualified contractors or vendors that you can select from, within those lists. So it's nice to be able to run those two processes concurrently, designing your site and sending those sites out to bid for your contractors. That's also going to help you control the install cost. And then, you'll move into procurement, the equipment selection, and a lot of times that's based on the design specs that we put out. So it's not only the chargers and the network software that you choose to purchase, but it's also the electrical equipment. This is panels, switchgear, everything that's all the way up to the transformer. And then we're going to help you prepare and submit that plan set for approval. We'll switch to the next slide here. Here's just a really simple site layout. I wanted to give you all just a visual of a nice clean layout here. We have the ADA accessible lane. We're identifying all of our equipment. We're showing the dimensions of our parking spots relative to our chargers. And this is basically what you're going to get when you work with an experienced design engineering firm like GreenLancer EV. We're going to give you this nice, good site layout that you can present to the other stakeholders. And then we're going to move this site layout through the electrical, structural, and civil process and create a firm permit plan set for you that you're going to submit to the cities and often to the utilities for approval. So let's go to the next slide here. And I want to just touch on ADA accessibility. This is a very hot topic in the industry right now. And this graphic here is showing you elements that you're going to need to consider, mainly in distance. So you've got your EV charger there on the right, and then the individual with the reach. So we need to make sure that these chargers in these site layouts are accessible to all EV drivers. And this is a good graphic for you all to have in the future, and also to consider when you're out, doing your site survey, you're doing your measurements, you're, figuring out the configuration of the parking spaces. This is going to help a lot. So we'll go to the next slide. And this is an example of a very well designed site. We've got our access aisle there next to our charger. We've got our spots, and we have our bollards that are protecting our equipment. We can float to the next slide. Yeah, so site design and planning and process, it's first a complete and comprehensive site survey where all stakeholders are identified and engaged. And the site design plan, it's complete. We've got future proofing factored in. So we're not only designing for today's EV drivers, but we're designing for future utilization. And then, of course, you're going to select your equipment and your network. And then you're going to select your electrical contractors. You're going to run your utility applications. And then you're going to submit that for approval by all AHJs. Jane, would you mind floating back to slide number 3?
Okay, tell me when I get there.
Yeah, because I want to talk a little bit more. There we go. I want to talk a little bit more about future proofing. So when you all are building out your sites and you're determining how many chargers that you want to install, it's important to again think about future utilization. So a really good way to do this is maybe you're installing 4 chargers, but you know that there's going to be a future demand for another 4, another 8. It's nice to build out the electrical equipment and the capacity when you're starting your first project. And many times that infrastructure cost is covered under the utility rebate programs and also some of the state-based and soon to be federal funding. So when you work with the design engineering firm, we're going to talk about what are the future needs. Are there going to be, more employees charging, more tenants charging, that sort of thing? And we're going to help you, guide you through that future expansion. And let's float down one more slide here. We'll go to the, okay, we'll go to the end there, to the very last slide. We'll kind of finish up on the utility application process. That future proofing is going to be really key in the interconnection process. So new service connections or upgraded service, the utilities are going to need to see that future load demand. And we can build that out on the load calculations and even the single line diagrams that are going to be submitted as a part of your application. And once that application is firmed up and ready to go, we'll move that permit plan set or that site design and submit that. We can submit that on your behalf, or you submit that to the cities, the utilities. And once you get approval, that's the whole goal, is to get that approved the first round, and then you're ready to start your install. So that's our overview. I know we've got some utility folks and Jason from Mobility House here that's going to definitely provide some added insight into the process, and I look forward to hearing from them.
Yeah, thanks so much, Joey. That was a great overview of just how complicated this can be and how important it is to create really good sites that people want to use to charge their electric vehicle is really important. I had no idea that a company like GreenLancer existed until I met you. And so it's really great just to hear more about kind of the whole landscape of experts that it takes to put these charging stations in the ground. Jason, you are up next to tell us more about why site planning and site design is important for Mobility House and for your customers. Let me know if you need help getting your slides queued up.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jane, for having us. Thank you, Joey, too, for kicking off the conversation. Site planning is very, very important to achieving your end results and to doing it in a way that you're satisfied with and will utilize for years to come. So very important topic. Jane, again, thank you for having us here. So I want to tell you guys first a little bit about who the Mobility House is, because I don't think many people have heard about us out in the industry. We're kind of a small, large player. So I'd like to share with you a little bit about us and then get into site planning itself and really what we feel is some of the meat and potatoes of important subjects. All right, so our brief agenda. So the Mobility House started in 2009. We started in Germany. We have an office in Zurich in Switzerland, and we also have an office south of San Francisco in Belmont. Our team is 250 plus, and currently we have over 700 EV fleets under management. And by that, I mean smart charging software management. Site planning, as what brought us here today, is extremely important to one, reducing your upfront out-of-pocket costs and your ongoing operating costs as you turn to EV or as some of your partners turn to EV. So a few really key subjects to discuss when we're talking about site planning and how to kick off the project, whatever it may be looking like. We've got a little bit of research here that we like to display some of the quotes from the Rocky Mountain Institute, as we feel their messaging here really aligns with the process and also how we like to approach it. So starting off with what Joey said, future-proofing is absolutely paramount. When you first think you're going to turn to EV, think about where you want to be when the project is done 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. Think about, is it the entire fleet? Is it 50% of the fleet? What does that look like? Because then you need to engage the utility and you want to have one conversation with those folks. As you can imagine, they're going to be very busy with everybody in Michigan who's looking to turn to EV. So they're going to look to want to do your project once and do it right the first time. So when you approach them very early. You know, we say that's the first conversation you should have is with the local utility, and approach them with the mindset of where do you want to be when you're done. Many different things fall into that, as Joey said, when you're developing your plan. One thing we like to mention is optimizing your charger to vehicle ratio for site planning. If it's a true fleet for yourself or your partner, it's not a public space, we say you don't need in a lot of cases, one charger per one vehicle. There's a few calculations that can be ran to figure out exactly how many chargers you would need, which helps saves tremendously on your upfront costs, and then also ongoing energy distribution costs as well. Big thing to think about here, and one thing we like to advise on, even people who choose others besides us in the space in which we participate, is ensure that your equipment is OCPP 1.6 or higher compliant. And what that stands for is Open Charge Point Protocol. It's a basic software protocol that allows interoperability. What we like to say is if you're open, you can talk to everybody. If it's a closed network, it's very similar to somebody with an Android phone trying to talk to somebody with an iPhone. The communication is lost. To boil it down to a more serious level, if you start off with closed protocol equipment, as you expand your operation and install more chargers, you might switch brand chargers, you might switch brand vehicles, and those vehicles may not communicate with the closed equipment you originally purchased. So 3 to 5 years from now, if site planning isn't done properly, you'll end up with some stranded equipment that no longer functions with your newest, latest, greatest vehicle. So very important. We always say OCPP compliant 1.6 or higher. Have that conversation with whoever your hardware supplier is. And then at the end of this, you really want to control your utility costs going forward. The project itself is a big mission, but it's the ongoing use of the energy that stays with you and your partner for the lifetime of their fleet. So the end goal in mind is what you always want to think of. And to optimize for this, going back to what Joey said, it's sitting down with somebody who can work with you on the entire plan, start to finish. On the left-hand side of this slide, you'll see all of the inputs we like to put into our simulators, and I'm sure as well, GreenLancer and other organizations in this space, they approach this very similar as far as what your inputs are from your fleet's duty cycle, which is paramount to figuring out what do you actually end up with for equipment, all the way down to utility rates. We spin it up in the simulator and we're able to figure out exactly what you may need from a vehicle standpoint, from a charging standpoint, from an upfront grid expansion. A lot of times you need to, well, actually say most times you must upgrade your input from the local utility because your service currently will not meet the requirement of your fleet. In certain cases that might not need to happen though. So we say it's important to run a simulation, do proper site planning to figure out what is going to be your actual need up front when you do go to build. And we'll run through real quick what the impact of this all is when it's all said and done. Site planning physically is very important. Once you finish all of your construction and your implementation, you would see the effects of an organization like ours, the Mobility House, or somebody else in the space who does the software, the actual digital management of what you physically installed. So if site planning is done properly, you then can digitally optimize what you've installed. Right here is an example of a partner of the Mobility House, Kings County Metro Transit Agency in Seattle. We partnered with them, as we said in the very beginning of the conversation. Even though we are the software folks here, we still stay in the conversation with the construction people, the OEMs of the vehicles to figure out what this looks like through the length of that conversation. And then utilizing our charging energy management software, Charge Pilot, the folks at Kings County were able to save $1 million up front on their initial out-of-pocket for infrastructure because they did not need to use a service input expansion. They're able to use just their current grid connection and then manage the distribution of that energy across a properly planned site in order to save $1 million on upfront costs. And then also by doing this and using ongoing charge management software capabilities, they're able to save another $100,000 per year on their electricity bills, time of use rates, peak power demand charges, so on and so forth. So again, all of it ties back together to say it's very important that you start planning for the end goal right from the beginning. Here is a nice graphic that just visually explains what I've kind of went through there. So if this is a different group. This is not Kings County. This is AVTA Transit in California again. They have the country's first 100% transit all electric fleet. We work with them on the charging and energy management, Of course, they went through site planning properly in order to achieve the results that we're going to talk about now. Essentially, they have 24 MCI transit buses, 12 level 3 DC fast chargers, and 2 ports on each charger. So essentially, you can plug in all buses at one time, but you don't need 1 charger per bus. What we said earlier in proper site planning, you can optimize based upon the duty cycle of the vehicles, how many chargers you'll actually need. So working with them, we wanted to avoid their time of use tariffs and other peak demand charges. If they did not plan properly, and if they would have just installed straight infrastructure, 1 charger per bus and charged as the buses came in, you'll see in the red graphic here, that essentially is unmanaged and not well-planned charging that yields the highest cost of electricity every single month to charge those buses. When you factor in proper site planning and then use a charge management software, you can see that very same load profile that's needed in order to operate the buses is distributed properly throughout their charging window. And a charging window is the available amount of time you have to charge a vehicle while it's parked. In this case, again, this resulted for these folks in $500,000 a year in savings for their utilities, and then a 67% reduction in annual costs overall. So it's quite impactful when you actually do this properly. And that's why we say do a lot of research from the beginning, sit down and start your conversations early. Thank you, Jane, again, for having us. Thank you, everybody from Michigan for tuning in and listening. I look forward to our conversation.
Thanks so much, Jason. I love hearing those examples. And I think for me, it brings it home. It's not just about the number of charging stations, but it's about where you put them and what technology is on them and how all of these pieces are working together. So I'm really curious to hear from Brett, the utility perspective on all of this, and how the utility engages in site planning, or why that's important, and how it relates to your programs as well. So Brett, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. And really, I was really happy to hear the first 2 speakers talk about the importance of that upfront planning. We find a lot of times customers will come to us and they don't have any documentation. They just say, we want chargers. As a utility who's set up to receive interconnection requests with a lot of detail, that adds a lot of complexity and time to the process. So working with experts in the industry, or however you're able to get all of that information up front, we definitely feel is best practice. It was actually one of Joey's first slides. There were 3 points on it. So I just want to reiterate them because I thought it was a really good way to start, where it's identify your power supply, conduct the load study, and engage with your utility early and often. I think those are really critical pieces. And I'm going to share my screen here as one of the, just a quick 1 slide of why we say engage with your utility early and often. A lot of people don't think about their electric grid holistically, right? It's kind of the power just coming to your site. But this is an old slide, but it still holds the exact same way today, where there's a lot that goes into delivering power to any one location. And depending on what the request is, down in the bottom right corner, there can be a lot of impacts upstream from there. And the further away you get from that site that needs the upgrades, the longer and more expensive it's going to be. So the earlier that you're engaging with the utility and kind of letting them know your plans, it can just make the whole process run a little bit smoother. The utility can help if there are any things that are major red flags or major barriers. Utility can kind of help think through maybe different ways to solve those in better ways than just trying to force some upgrades upstream. So just wanted to really quick share 1 slide, and then I'll kind of talk through a couple of additional points here. As part of all of those upgrades, the utility industry is definitely similar to many other industries right now, where there are supply chain crunches and issues. and it takes time to get transformers and material. And if you're a fleet operator and you're receiving an e-transit van 2 months from now and you haven't started talking to your utility, you might not have the power to charge it when you get the vehicle, right? And that's the last thing that we want as an electric provider. So kind of accounting for some additional time from a supply chain perspective, at least right now, is also just good practice. And then just a couple of additional points when you're thinking about your site design is really think through the use case. We think about dwell times a lot, right? How often or how long are people parked at the chargers that you're installing? It's not always the case that faster is better. There's a lot of talk about 350 kW chargers for fast charging light duty vehicles, but there are a lot of times where you don't need 350 kW. You can get away with less than that. And then there are other times where maybe it's a mix of high powered fast chargers and level 2 at a different site. So really think through how long people are going to be parked there and how quickly they're going to want to move on. And part of that's going to be with kind of what your service is as a business, and then what amenities you have to kind of keep people. We see a lot of dwell times actually increase for EV drivers when they park at businesses, because once they're in the door, they tend to spend a little bit more time, spend a little bit more money. So just kind of thinking through how long people are going to be there, and then thinking through, are you just going to be serving passenger vehicles? Are you going to be serving larger vans? Are you going to be serving medium duty delivery vehicles? As you're designing a site, passenger vehicle sites are probably relatively easy to put a couple of chargers into a couple of spots that you have at your site. But if you have larger vehicles that aren't used to backing up, you might need to look at pull-through sites, right? So just trying to think through all of the potential uses for those chargers. And then I think both of the other guys said it earlier, just kind of on the future-proofing side. Conduit's cheap. Doing that up front, trenching through concrete a second time is not anything that anybody wants to see happen. So if you think that you're going to start with a couple of chargers and you might go to 4 or 8 at some point, just put the conduit in. You put it in the ground, have it ready, so that if you do upgrade in the future, that you're able to relatively cheaply and effectively just get that infrastructure in the ground. So Jane, that's all I had on my end. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's great to hear how aligned all three of you are, but also that there's different areas of expertise and you're all representing a different stakeholder that has to come together to make this work. Brett, love that you said, conduit's cheap, only dig once. I think that's super important. So I'm going to go ahead and actually stop recording.